Well, needless to say, Dan Shechtman is the winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry 2011. Thanks again for coming. Dan spoke about the future of Israel and the future of the world. And I think this is a good time to mention an activity which the MIT Enterprise Forum is opening now together with Sofen. Sofen is a non-profit, and the founder of Sofen, Smadar Nehab, is here on the second row, and the manager of Sofen, Paz, is here somewhere here on the 10th row. And Sofen, together with the MIT Enterprise Forum, have won a tender of the American Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they will open in February a center of tech entrepreneurship at Kfar Qasem, which will serve the Arab population in the Triangle. And in this, we are in fact opening another door for Arab entrepreneurs, Arab technologists, Arab engineers who could not get jobs when Smadar started Sofen 8 years ago, and who now are getting more and more jobs in Israeli companies and are developing. And this is a sort of an internal immigration that we are viewing that will fill in some of the vacancies that we now have in the high-tech industry. So wish us luck and help us accomplish what we would like to accomplish in Kfar Qasem. Thank you. Back to the future of Israel. Nir Zohar, president of Wix, an incredible company. An incredible company that went public on NASDAQ how much time ago?
2 years ago.
2 years ago at a valuation of $600 million? 650, give or take $50 million. Now traded at about $900 million. Startup nation, grow-up nation. Nir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and argue a little bit about the exit versus growth trends in Israel, and I don't think it's really an argument. But I would like to try and touch a little bit about that trend of companies that want to grow in Israel and what I think that it means in terms of the next few years. So Startup Nation, I think we all know and mentioned before. So I think that already today, Israel is definitely a leading global R&D center. If you look at the numbers of the last 10 years, you see that definitely in terms of exits, it's almost 1,000 exits in 10 years, which is basically amazing. Over $50 billion in proceeds from those exits. Today, we have more than 260 R&D centers operating in Israel. Most of them were established as part of those exits, a large part of them. In terms of number of R&D centers, it's the highest per capita globally. And if you look at the sector itself, so those R&D centers run by multinationals accounts to somewhere between 30 to 40% of the employment in the high-tech sector. And out of the GDP that is generated by that sector, about 50% comes from those centers. Sounds amazing, right? So first of all, yes, it is amazing. And I think it's important for me to voice that so it won't be interpreted as if I'm saying that exit is bad and growth and IPOs and going to the next level is the only good alternative. I think that definitely exits are important. I think that definitely would never come to the stage of, as Ayala mentioned before, of talking about growth if we haven't gone through the stage of the startups and the exits. And that accounts for money and knowledge and also very much for confidence. which is also a very important thing in life. That being said, I think that there is an alternative which is becoming more and more interesting and is becoming somewhat of a trend in Israel these days. And that move up from startup to grow-up nation is something that I think companies like Wix is definitely, I think, are part of that trend, but you see more and more of those in the past years. You can see that by companies that have decided to go public. And I have to say, going public is not the goal itself. It's a means to an end. Going public is a stage where you can indeed give your early investors a way out without having to relinquish control over the company from management to another management. It's a great way for the entrepreneurs, for the early employees also to make some profit and basically be able to carry on for a longer time. And more than anything else, it's a huge investment fund that injects a huge amount of capital into the company that can then be used and leveraged towards further growth. So you see many companies, not only Wix, that have done so in NASDAQ and NYSE in the last couple of years. We've seen CyberArk and SolarEdge and Imperva. And I do believe that we're going to see quite a few more, which I know personally from talking to these people are thinking about doing so in the next few years. And there's also other companies that will probably remain private, but will continue growing, and do that by acquiring other companies and finding other means to sustain themselves. But the dream to grow is something which is now beginning to flourish. So we need to change that paradigm of thinking about ourselves. And if you think that paradigm is more than anything else, is considering ourselves as an R&D center. In many ways, the world thinks about us as an R&D center, and companies come here to find technology, and then they buy technology. And usually, either they take it out of Israel, or they continue to manage it here. But when they do so, one of the downsides of it is that for the companies that want to keep on growing here, suddenly there's huge competition. For example, engineers. If 30 to 40% of the engineers in Israel are being employed by multinationals, then it means that when I want to employ engineers, I have very high competition from these big companies that usually can also pay a much higher paycheck than I can. Think about the world multinationals. When I say multinationals, everyone around here and everyone outside of this hall understand that I'm talking about, in my industry, about Google and Facebook and Apple. But a company like Wix, a company like Fiverr, a company like GetTaxi, and there's quite a few more, are companies that sell worldwide. They have offices and employees worldwide. For all things and all considerations, we are also multinationals. We don't think about ourselves like that. We are still a little bit caught in that state of mind of thinking about ourselves like an R&D center. And that needs to change. The baseline we have, Startup Nation, is amazing. It's almost unparalleled. Look at this. Tel Aviv is number 2 to Silicon Valley in absolute numbers, not per capita. We have the highest number of companies going public in NASDAQ after US and China. So in fact, if you look at it in terms of foreign countries or foreign companies going public in NASDAQ, we are number 2 after China, which is slightly bigger than Israel. Largest numbers, and that goes back to the Silicon Valley numbers. So we really have a great baseline in order to move and do that paradigm shift. So if you think about that kind of a very, very, very basic evolution, companies go from startups to growth companies, and usually exits happen here, within the boom move from startups to growth companies, whether the technology was proven or a company actually managed to sell its technology or its product, and some big giant out there said, okay, this is great. In many cases, when it's something that is being sold business to business or enterprise edition, one of the big giants is somebody whom you've actually sold your technology to as a customer and says, this is strategically important for me, I want to make it my own. And then also you see that huge jump in sales after you do the exit because suddenly you have a huge distribution channel. And this requires something different. The move from here to here is something that completely changes the company. I'm going to talk about it in a second. But I think that our aim should be to manage to bring more companies here so we can start having companies moving here. And we have a few of those that grew up here. And I think that one of the best examples, also in order to understand what's the value of it, in my mind, is Checkpoint. Checkpoint went public in '93, if I remember correctly. They were a small company with, I think, about $35 million in sales, which is today something number you can't even go public with. Sorry? 95? 95, sorry. We can check it afterwards. Or somebody can check while I'm talking. And then, but the point is that they have decided to do something which back then was very remarkable. They said, we do not want to sell the company, and I'm pretty sure that they could have found a good buyer. We want to go public and we want to grow the company. And in the 20-something years, depends on what was the date, since they went public, look how many companies, how much of the Israeli cyber industry is based on knowledge, expertise, and money that came out from Checkpoint by its founders, by its early employees, people who went through there, did the best school possible for cyber, and then moved on to start developing their own companies. By the way, Imperva, that I mentioned before, public company on its own, one of that club. And actually, in a different presentation, I have this huge cloud that shows all the various companies that came out of that company. When companies choose to grow like that, when they get to this stage, they start a spillover that actually defines and helps create a sector in the industry. And in Checkpoint's example, that is cyber. Sorry. Okay, so let's go back quickly. The exit. I think there's a few things that push people towards the exit early, whether it's their investors wanting to get the return on their money quickly, whether it's the founders themselves that don't have money and want to be able to meet the money as soon as possible. There aren't enough good examples of the alternative, which prevents people from dreaming big. And definitely there are a lot of regulatory barriers. There's also the urban legend, which I hate, saying that Israeli entrepreneurs cannot manage a big company. That's a bit of a story of an egg and a hen, right? So you need to start having those companies so people can learn how to manage those companies. I think all of these are solvables, and it's definitely we can see that by the ongoing trend of more companies growing. However, companies cannot do it alone. Definitely, I think that on the regulatory barriers, there's a lot of work to be done with government. Like I said, that in the last year, we've been working a lot with different branches of government. And I think it will be surprised to hear they all want to help. They all try to help. And many of them actually succeed in helping. So I believe that that part of it is going to be, we're going to be fine. We're going to solve it. We're going to be able to grow companies in Israel. However, there's another big part of it, which I think is relevant definitely for a lecture or a talk here in Tel Aviv University. And that is, consider for a second who's the employee at Israeli high tech. When I talk about employees in Israeli high tech, you think about these guys, okay? The engineers. There is a quoted number of 300,000 employees working in the high tech industry. It's almost always talking about engineers. However, if you want to grow companies to the next stage, it means that they need to do new things, not only develop. They need to know how to design, whether it's the user interface or product or marketing. They need to know how to create beautiful products that can be delivered globally. They need to know how to do global marketing, how to do an ad, a Super Bowl campaign, an ad on the Super Bowl, or run $100 million on a Google account in order to bring traffic. And they need to learn how to manage internationally. As I said before, companies cannot do that alone. We can teach, we can handhold, but in order for many companies to be able to do that, we need more. And I think that this is definitely where academy should step in. I think that we should think about the next stage of high-tech and academy working together. First of all, teaching in academy all of those professions I mentioned before. Some of them are taught today, some of them are pseudo-taught today, some of them are not even mentioned. I think they should all be taught in one place. So these people, when they learn the different professions, it will be something that they can share with each other and actually understand how does one thing move to the other and how a company interacts. It means that it will create the connection between those students that will be equivalent to what the Army does in actually starting to create innovation within the walls of academy. And obviously, handshaking, doing a very strong handshaking with the industry itself and bringing the recent knowledge to the hands and to the minds of the students. I will skip that because I'm out of time, and I'll say just one thing. I think that the chance here is amazing in terms of what can happen here. 10 companies, each worth $10 billion in 10 years from now, means a huge difference for Israel. In terms of how many people can work in high-tech, in terms of adding more sectors of the demographics to high-tech, such as Arabs and ultra-Orthodox and many others. And I think that it's achievable, but it is a joint effort. And earlier this year, I was in a small forum that met with Shimon Peres, and he said, you know, being a founding member of Israel, being part of the founders' generation of Israel, I have one huge regret. And the biggest regret I have is I think that we, as the people who founded the country, we dreamt too small. We should have dreamt much bigger. Because the effort of achieving a small dream and a big dream are basically almost the same effort. So you might as well dream as big as you can. Thank you.